Connecting with your tarot deck is something that helps to build a relationship and create a bond and a synergy with your tool. This then transforms your tarot deck from tool to personal guide. At least that's how I like to see it. My tarot decks go through a process, and each one goes through a very different process because each deck is quite different. Some days I'll be inspired to take my deck out for a walk. Other days I'll be inspired to allow my deck to sit in sacred space in a grid for an extended period of time. Other days I'll allow myself to take my deck on a beautiful pilgrimage where I can walk through the forest for hours and hours and find a magnificent tree and then, connect with that sacred energy of the tree. And it really depends on the deck itself. And I like to think of this process as rather intuitive. I do believe that when you first receive your tarot deck, that going for a good flick through your tarot deck, looking at every card, writing down all your beautiful snippets of wisdom as you're looking at those cards, those first impressions, that helps to start that process. By doing that, the medicine of that deck, the personality of that deck, will slowly make its way into your consciousness and will begin to work on it. And that's how I like to see it personally. Some decks feel very elemental to me. They feel very, swords. Other decks feel very earth. Other decks feel very all-rounder, quite balanced, or very water, and so on and so forth. So I like to then determine that elemental energy. I like to then determine if a deck is attuned or not attuned, and sometimes that comes from practical use and being able to lay out your cards and do your readings and do those sorts of things. But the actual bonding, the connecting with a deck can happen in various different ways. I am naturally very ritualistic, so I like to do things in a very ritualistic manner. So flicking through my deck, writing down my first impressions, picking out my favorite cards, sitting with it in meditation, going through it and giving it a really good smoke cleanse, and pairing it with a crystal and doing all those beautiful things that I like to do personally helps me to then build a relationship and actually honor my tarot decks as a tool to work with in magic and in ritual. And that's really important to me. I want to breathe life back into the deck. I want to allow the stock to remember that it came from a tree, a sentient being, and to remember the magic of being rooted in the earth and connecting with the life force of Mama Gaia. And so I like to look at it that way. Not everybody does. Not everyone's animistic. Not everyone thinks of the tarot as a sacred tool. That's perfectly okay, but I certainly do. And I genuinely believe that the tarot can be an incredible sacred working tool, a compass, a guide. So connecting with a deck becomes important. Just like you take your time connecting with another soul, making a friend, cementing a relationship, falling in love, your deck too requires a similar type of process. And so spending time with your tarot deck is perhaps the first step in that process, and allowing that deck to get to know you just as much as you want to get to know that deck. You're going to see snippets of the personality of that deck in every one of those 78 cards, but that deck needs to also see snippets of your personality. Some people like to sleep with their deck under the pillow. That actually physically makes me cringe because I think, what if I crush one of the cards? I'm a bit funny with my decks and I like to preserve their beauty and their intact nature. But if that's you, if you like to get a little bit messy, if you don't mind a bent card here and there, then who am I to tell you otherwise? Others like to have a deck in their purse. Others like to have a deck in their car. Others like to take decks out on big, beautiful walks or do outside ritual. And getting a process going, determining what works for you it's a beautiful thing. Now, I want to be really practical about this because time is always a factor for adults. It's the thing. I'm a mother of 3, so I understand this. I'm a mother of 3. I run my own business. I write, and I do all this sort of stuff, right? And so time is a huge factor. So I need to be prepared to make sure that my tarot decks can come with me no matter what my day looks like. I don't just let it sit there for that occasion where I plan to do something with it. That's not the deck getting to know me. That's me honoring the deck. It's not the deck getting to know me personally. It's not the deck connecting with my life force as I'm moving through my day to day and doing all the mundane tasks that actually comprise my day to day. Yes, I have morning ritual. Yes, I have daily practice. And yes, the deck is there with me for those things, but it's also with me when I go down to check the mail. And they know how frustrated I can be going down and checking the mail, or picking my kids up from school, or going to a school event, for instance, or a coven gathering, or, you know, something else. It just comes with me. It just comes with me. And, you know, coffee shops when I'm writing, or coffee shops when I'm just sitting there having a little bit of my own personal time, I might take out my deck. This is actually a tricky one, folks, because there are people that will walk past you while you have your deck out there and you're shuffling and you're thinking, I might just draw a card and do a little bit of journaling here while I'm staring at this beautiful view. You know, I often like to go down to cafes that face beautiful views, like the beach or a river or a valley, whatever. And they're like, oh, you're a tarot reader, would you pull a card for me? And yeah, if you're going to do this, you have to be prepared for that. I rarely say no. I like for people to be able to connect with the tarot in a healthy way, but I try not to seat myself in areas where people can continuously walk past me and see what I'm doing, so that I don't put myself in that position. That's more or less what I'm saying. So, connecting with your tarot deck, allowing your tarot deck to connect with your energy, is an integral part of really building a relationship with a magical deck. Now, there are decks that I use for client readings only that I'll just grab. They're attuned, so if I'm doing a love reading, I might, grab the Taramuka, for instance, and if I'm doing like a really, dark sort of shadowy reading, I might grab the Victorian. It's not the Victorian, I might grab Bohemian Gothic. Had to think about that, my apologies. I've got a lot of decks in my head. And, I go through those processes and honor the reading, but I genuinely like to choose a couple of decks that I would consider to be all-rounders, and even more than that, truly magical decks. Decks that really entice the muse. Decks that really allow you to trigger that sense of sacred. And we all have those decks. We all have had that experience with images from a deck, for instance. There are some beautiful decks out there, beautiful artworks, some really obscure ones that tend to work on that same aspect within and trigger those feelings of magical, mystical, sacred, divine, powerful, and so on and so forth. So finding that deck and utilizing that deck in ritual, taking that deck around with you, allowing that deck to get to know you, who you are, what you like to do, not just when you're in ritual, but when you're also just conducting your everyday business, is one way to truly bring that deck into that sphere of consciousness of yours wholly and completely. It's then not separate to you. It's not just reserved for magical workings. It knows you. It knows how frustrated you are at standing in line at the supermarket. It knows it. It knows how hard it is for the post office to get, your shit together, and, it knows that. It knows that. It knows you. And you want it to know you, because when you are in ritual space with something that doesn't know you, and you don't know that something very well, then no true relationship, no true energy build, connection can truly come of that. In the same way that you like to work, that I like to work with my coven sisters, for instance. I've taken my time to get to know them. I've shared sacred space with them. I've shared, mundane moments and wines and laughter and trips and so on and so forth, to allow myself to build a relationship. And so each and every time I step into sacred space like that, the rituals that are created in that space are truly magical. They are intense, they're beautiful, and everyone walks away with that sense of awe. And that's because we've taken the time to get to know each other, in the same way that I like to take my time to get to know my tarot decks, to build that sense of sacred, to allow that deck to get to know me as much as I want to get to know it. You can do yourself a deck interview. That will take you, a millimeter into that cultivation of a relationship. You can have a conversation with your tarot deck by asking question after question and laying out your cards like this, and having a bit of fun, having some wine and talking to your tarot deck, shuffling your tarot deck, being really practical, just bringing it in, giving it a hug, making it yours, Connecting with your tarot deck is not something that should ever be overlooked, particularly not when you are crafting magic with that deck. If you're just going to have it as a collection item, then yeah, do your thing. If you are really just going to use it on one particular person, on one particular type of question, one theme, then you might not want to go through the trouble of doing this. But for this particular course, for witch weaving with the tarot, you want to build that relationship with your deck. You want to take it out. You want to introduce it to your family and your kids and your pets. Not too close to your pets. And you want to allow your life to spill into it. You want to allow all those beautiful tendrils of energy that make up who you are in your natural everyday existence, and you want to infuse that to your deck and vice versa. So take your deck around with you. Take it to the places that you like to go. Allow it to feel you when you're frustrated. Allow it to feel you when you're happy. Allow it to be by your bedside when you're sleeping, or under your pillow if you're that type of person. Allow it to be in the car with you when you're facing your traffic in whatever region of the world that you drive in. Allow it to come with you and accompany you and absorb and drink in your energy. And start to look at that deck in a very different way to what you would any other deck that you have in your collection. It's about creating and cultivating a relationship that sets that one deck apart from all the others. And it's a beautiful thing to do. It's a time-consuming thing to do. It takes energy, but if you're doing it, then it's really only one extra step to grab that deck and out you go. So things to think about. And then, when you've got that deck where you need it to be, ritual will be so much nicer with it. So much more yummy and tactile and sympathetic and considerate, respected. All of the things. So I get very excited when I talk about these sorts of things, because spending time and investing energy in anything has a positive and transformational impact. And yes, people think that some of what I say and some of the ways that I like to use my tarot are pretty fucking ridiculous. But truth be told, those people lack imagination. I'm not here to criticize anyone, really. That's not something that I'm attempting to do here. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of outside perception on the mystical, the magical components of tarot are very misconstrued. And it's up to you to determine what works for you. It's up to you to determine what feels right for you. Separate from everything else, it's up to you. You're the governor, you're the chief, you're the president, you're the person, you're the witch that's going to work with this deck. So make sure it is what you need it to be. Invest the time in it, and it will absolutely be that for you. Long-winded, but I think I've covered everything.